Welcome everyone to our webcast. I am thrilled to have an incredible panel of experts with us. Mark Friedgen from Ninja Holdings, Vadim Lidich from PaperStack, and Mario Schwartz from Sphere. And with these folks, we'll dive into some of the most pressing and exciting topics that are shaping the future of financial services, from the most promising applications of AI and real-world success stories to tackling challenges like data security, ethical AI use, workforce readiness. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. So, Mark, I'm coming to you. What are the most promising applications of AI in financial services today?
I think we need to discuss what you think about when you say the word AI. I think the majority of people today, when they think of AI, they're thinking of the LLMs with a chat interface. And it turns out that those particular things are not particularly useful in financial services. However, one of the main areas that we're looking at very heavily is to leverage LLMs to improve compliance. So we're talking to a number of vendors that have built monitoring and testing tools, as well as uh, sort of compliance reporting and analysis tools that are capable of parsing arbitrary documents, parsing actual speech and emails and text messages, and being able to leverage that technology to really evaluate the compliance envelope that we are sort of faced with in financial services. And that to me is probably the most actionable and exciting use of AI today in financial services.
So you're looking at the back office operations more than the front side, which is customers. Mario, what do you think of it? I know you from the past conversations what you think of AI, so there might be some opposition here.
No, it's not oppositions. I think the question is once again is let the business need drive what tool you're going to implement more than forcing a tool just because it's a fad, right? So if you're using the right chisel, to get your diamond, you're gonna get a better diamond than if you just do the wrong tool. And Mark is right for what he's looking for on the back end. That's a good use of an LLM. I think the challenge that I see with the financial applications is that because this is what everybody's looking for, they keep adding the so-called co-pilots or smart AIs to their applications, and then people think that that's going to solve a lot of functions and problems, and it's like you're bringing an intern to the fold and asking to tell you the answers that you're asking for somebody who's been doing the business for 5 or 10 years. What do you think, Vadim? Because you were not in your head there.
I was kind of reflecting on what Mark was saying in terms of using AI for the back office, and I was kind of reflecting on our own AI adoption journey. And even if we take the word AI out and just say advanced technology and what's possible, with AI agents, with machine learning, with different, shapes and forms of, algorithmic decision making, it's clear to me that where AI or advanced technology is really helping out in financial services is taking a ton of structured and these days even unstructured data and come up with insights. So what PaperStack has done, and for context, we provide working capital for e-commerce businesses. So we're very much in the B2B space. There's a lot of data involved in terms of e-commerce data, financial data, accounting data, and then you look at things like behavior. Are those who are applying for financing willing and able to share their financial data, or are they sporadically trying to cover up certain aspects of their performance? And believe me or not, by looking at over 2,000 of such applications, you start seeing patterns emerge. In the past, you would have had a person who would be responsible for every single file, and they would be able to point out certain discrepancies in the file or certain missing information or potential red flags that we should be accounting for. These days, you can load up 2,000 previous applications and their historical data into a model and have insights, be provided to you on demand. And I can dive deeper into how, PaperStack uses advanced technologies for underwriting, fraud mitigation, streamlining sort of like the application and compliance and portfolio monitoring. But a high level to kick off the conversation, I think there's a lot more that we can do now with a lot less resources, given just how much data there is to look at and evaluate. And I think that's where the technology really shines.
Thanks, Vadim. I want to go back to Mark because I think Vadim, some of the points you made there, that makes me go back to Mark's original point. He says, Mark, you said by AI, people largely refer to LLM or understand or think of LLMs. What was that? I
Well,
just felt like there was a subtle dig there.
it is a little bit of a subtle dig in
Right.
that I think we're on a longer term evolutionary spectrum in terms of what you would think of as Vadim mentioned, as advanced technologies, as sort of decision support. And so we've been doing things that over the years have all been called AI, and then they got a different name. So the way I think about it, right? You used to do underwriting, well, you did statistics. Then we started get into, sort of advanced decision support as then statistics, and you started looking at building models. So you went to things like decision trees and expert systems and stuff like that. Then you went deeper. You went into machine learning, right? And machine learning for a while was called AI. And really all of it is we're just getting better at making computers do stuff. And if you look at it that way, then it's not a revolution every couple of years. It's an evolution. And yes, they get better, they get faster, etc. I recently listened to an interview with the CEO of ASML. So they're the ones that work on advanced chip lithography. And one of the most fascinating things that he talked about is they have a view really 5 years out as to Moore's law, because they are, in fact, the ones driving one of the most important inputs to that, right? And that's the ability to etch chips. And so, if you think about the current advances, right, there is truly the transformer that builds LLMs is a revolutionary architecture, right? It was a new invention. But the concept of neural networks has been around, well, since I went to college, and I got a lot of gray in my beard. And it turns out that we've finally gotten enough computing power to do some of these things, right? And that's exciting. And so if you want to look at these advanced technologies, sometimes you can look at things that, have been around for a while in research literature, et cetera, and ask the question, well, when will we have the computing power to do these things? And that's when it starts to get exciting.
Yeah, Mark, I think part of when we're looking at, and you're right, it's been an evolution because I built my first smart system, God, well, over 30 plus years ago. And it was just driven by whatever technology you had on hand. I mean, the reality is I was running on a mainframe, IBM mainframe in early 80s, mid 80s. Right now, the power that big computer that took a whole living room area to host my oldest son, gaming computer has more power than that mainframe they used to have in there. So when you talk about the evolution of how we go, and it's all about how you can get to the answer nowadays. I mean, before it would take months and sometimes years to create some of these intelligence systems, yeah, and now we can do it in weeks.
That's some of the applications of AI, and I think we looked at already. We heard from you how this may evolve in 5 to 10 years. Maybe just one line from Mark on how you see these applications evolving.
Well, I think that the next stage of what we're seeing is, I think what folks are calling agentic systems, right? So these are systems that now go out and perform tasks without explicitly being, say, coded to do it in a particular way. And I think that that's a very, very interesting development. I think that a lot of what these things do today is still early. There's a future there. If you want to look out even further, I think you need to start thinking about these agents as, potential, I want to say employees, but like, at a level of resources that are part of your organization, right? So, you think about any organization. There are folks that specialize in particular tasks. There are folks that, have expertise in this area or that area. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to see organizations construct sort of this hybrid structure, right? Where you have humans and you have these agents, and they divide up the tasks that are necessary to run an organization based on their expertise. You're already seeing that some of the models are better at, you know, art, and some of the models are better at writing, and some of the models are better at code. To be honest, none of them are really that good at any of these things yet, but they're getting there. They're getting better. They're getting more sophisticated, and a lot of tasks that don't require a huge amount of sophistication can now be put to these agents. I've recently been playing around with the really advanced stuff with O1 deep research, and it's actually really, really interesting because it's a very expensive tool, right? And if you think about it, sometimes you have very, very expensive employees, and you don't want to give your very, very expensive employees every task out there. And so, one of the folks I follow on Twitter suggested that what you actually want to do is you want to use the cheaper models to construct a better problem description for the expensive model, so you're not iterating as much with the expensive model. And I've tried this, and that's a really, really fascinating architecture because it does work, and it really mirrors, human management in some way, right? You can take an intern and say, hey, go do some research, go find a bunch of stuff. Once you've brought all that together, let me get this more senior guy to actually make a decision,
Mhm.
right? If I go send the senior guy to do research, it's a waste of his time.
On that, I will pivot to our next topic. So, Vadim, I'm going to ask you about this because you touched upon some of the use cases that you're already tackling in the real world. So, I want to talk about risk assessment and fraud detection in financial transactions. So, in what ways AI and machine learning is improving these areas? Let's start with that, and I've got more questions for you.
The short answer, it makes it very fast. And it comes up with things that maybe a person would only be able to come up with after working on such things for a very long period of time. Whereas with enough data, you can actually have a model that can go through the data and ask questions of it and iterate and sort of come up with the suggestions on whether or not this should be interpreted as high risk or low risk, whether or not there are certain things that are missing that should be requested, and then from there work with your own. In our case, it would be something like a credit policy or a underwriting process that we have documented to sort of understand how compatible or how out of the box this particular client or this particular underwriting use cases compared to everything else that we're doing, or suggest to us if this is something we should be doing in the first place. Does this actually fit into what we're supposed to be doing? And so in the credit world, specifically, when you raise capital, you make certain promises, and usually it comes down to specific things that you're able and not able to do. Different industries, different geographies, different use cases, different financial profiles of, and you can slice and dice the universe of potential, clients in any way you can. But sometimes it's really hard to actually, look at the application and say it actually 100% fits into our portfolio because there's so many moving parts. And so what really the technology allows to do is very effectively make that decision and recommend certain assets to be added into the portfolio or not. From the underwriting and risk perspective, we've had scenarios where we would be able to identify gaps or red flags in the application that a human would not be able to. And that's again based on patterns, based on 2000 plus other applications that we received and processed. And so in certain scenarios, we would be requesting additional information to kind of clarify and cover the gaps. but you want to find the right balance between requesting every possible piece of information and really turning away a lot of quality customers that just are maybe don't want to provide that much information up front before they're clear about the value that they're receiving, versus actually protecting yourself and making sure that you have all the information available to you to make that decision. So internally at PaperStack, what we've done is, we're actually using technology to decide when and what information to request from a borrower to maximize the conversion up front, get the borrower or the applicant to that value. So, whether that's certain amount of capital that they'll be able to receive at certain terms. And once they have enough clarity, and maybe even once they sign, the paperwork, that's when we sort of request the rest. But, figuring out, who should or shouldn't be providing tax returns, or who should or shouldn't be providing access to, accounting and, platform, who should or shouldn't be providing access to, different bank accounts that they maybe not even using anymore, but might have valuable information there, about their previous performance that we should be integrating into, things like that is where technology really helps us, narrow the scope. And then from the underwriting perspective, the final point there is, efficiency in terms of evaluating a ton of data. So, my background and my co-founder's background is coming from a banking world, but those guys still send information over fax, and they still read through, a sheet where, there's a lot of kind of manual processes involved in the underwriting, and the underwriter themselves is, the role is very inefficient coming from a traditional financial institution. What we've done is we sort of taken that same conservative approach to underwriting, but made it much more efficient, where an applicant can go through the whole application in less than 24 hours from application to decision to funding, and that's never been done, never been possible in the bank because of how inefficient the process is. And so efficiency in terms of sourcing data, analyzing data, making those decisions is what we're benefiting.
I'm gonna basically tackle both of you guys, because I think for the audience, and going back to what Mark was saying, agentic models. When people say, "What the hell are agentic models?" so let's just tackle that one first, and then I'll relate it to some of the examples that you were talking about, Vadim. So what Mark was saying, agentic models, there are different types of agentic models, right? Because they can be reactive, they can be learning, they can be hybrids, right? Like Mark was talking about the future. That's where he was going with it. But you already have seen some agentic systems, because if as soon as you see a Tesla right next to you, guess what? That autonomous driving vehicle, or trying to get in there, all those Jaguars, that you see in San Francisco driving by themselves, and you see, oh, who the hell, who's driving that? That's an agentic system, AI assistants, what Vadim is talking about, those are, those assistants that can recommend actions and interact with the particular persona that is needing the information. That's another one. There's some scary ones, which is, finance and trading. Do you really want to have an agentic model really doing the finance and trading automatically for you? Maybe in the future we'll get there, but I don't know that you really want to get there, because I don't know how the market will withstand, a bunch of different bots fighting with each other, to sort of make fun
That
of.
happens today, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
the
I've seen some people
entirety
doing it.
of
Yeah.
no, but I mean, look, in traditional finance, right? The vast majority of high frequency traders are entirely fully automated systems. Now, they're not AI. They're usually programmed algorithms, or learning algorithms, things like that. But they've been around for a long, long time. In fact, one of the more interesting things I want to point out. So Vadim was saying, oh, the bank does faxes. Well, the first lending business we built back in 2005, 2006, one of the things we advertised was no fax loans. And so 20 years ago, we had built fully automated underwriting for consumer loans. That was an actual innovation at the time. And now we do it with a different scale and a lot more data and more interesting things like cash flow analysis. We actually sell that the CRA called Edge. And so as I mentioned, it's all evolution right now. For business loans like the Deems business, it's harder because there's more different and complicated information, and the scale is smaller, right? So we look at 20,000 applications a day. So we're able to use more traditional statistical methods within our models just because the volume is so much higher. And so it's this interesting trade-off where, you know, we're always fundamentally in this battle for data. I tell my team that, remember, data is gold. Every piece of data you throw away, you are literally throwing money away. It may be, you may not know how it's useful today, but it will be useful in the future. And if you listen to some of the folks working on training AIs, et cetera, this is where they're running into problems. They're running out of data. They're having to invent synthetic data. And so I think that's really the next complex frontier in all of this is, where do you find useful data?
That is indeed the question, Mark. And Vadim, thanks to you as well for addressing the previous segment. I want to come to a rather, let's say, controversial topic. Is there such thing as ethical use of AI in the financial world? I would love for you to weigh in on this topic for me and where you see the risk. Let's start with Vadim.
Tough questions come to me first. I thought Mark will get all the tough questions, and I just get to piggyback off of his reasoning. Look, I don't think I'm intelligent enough or smart enough to to talk about ethical use of AI from a business practice perspective. We certainly try to pick the clients that understand what they're looking for, and then provide them with the product that helps them. The industry itself, and this is where PaperStack being one small player in the vast industry, which is not as regulated as a lot of other industries, and that creates a lot of opportunity for somebody else to come in and do things entirely different. Is it legal? Yes, but at some point you have to ask yourself, things like pricing, things like business practices, collections, all that. And unfortunately, the reality is the industry where we play has had a bad reputation because of all the things that I just mentioned, right? Like, incredibly high, rates, providing capital to companies or applicants or borrowers that don't really understand what they're getting into. They will, in some cases, never be able to repay any of that. In some cases, they already have 5 other loans outstanding, and they're just kind of kicking the can down the road. Use of personal guarantee, all that. And so, do you say, we'll use AI to evaluate this information and then decide who is or is not the right fit for our product? I certainly think that there is a way where we can use technology like that to say, look, what are the risks? And you can ask the same question in different ways. The way we're asking it today is, what's the likelihood of them not paying back the money or the capital that we provide? But the way you can ask that question in a slightly different way is, what is the chance that they really don't understand what they're signing up for? Or what is the chance that this business or our product is not the right fit for their business? And so this is where I feel like a lot of what our sales team, a lot of what we do organically through conversations is sometimes educate a customer and then allow them to disqualify themselves from working with us by sort of leading towards certain questions or the line of reasoning where they start to understand that this isn't necessarily an equity investment or kind of like something that you can use for things that you don't really necessarily have kind of like a clear idea of the return what's going to be on this. And so in a lot of times businesses that are too small or situations that are too tricky, even though yes, we can work with a lot of those companies, we talk them out of it, and that's why our acceptance rate is so small, but also why we very rarely actually have issues in the portfolio. That's the path that we've taken. But I think as you start not just sourcing that data for, and I guess this is where Luke, where you're really going with ethical use of AI is, do you take that data, make a decision, and then throw it away, or do you keep it and then you train advanced models and continuously reuse that? And this is where I think the industry will have to come up with its own standards. All this like right to be forgotten and other kind of data management issues. But at least that's what it sounds like to me when you ask that question. I don't necessarily think AI will change how we see ethics or how businesses see ethics. I think it will just amplify the way that businesses already are, right? And so back to my example of, the industry being done, being constructed in certain ways with certain players. I think whatever you're concerned the AI can do was already done in other ways, right? And so maybe that's just like a food for thought, but I think that it's not necessarily going to change or enable us to do a lot more of what we haven't done already, at least from like a pattern perspective.
How can organizations ensure that their workforce is adequately prepared and trained to work alongside AI technologies or applications?
So our team is incredibly diverse, and not everybody was, like my uncle likes to say, was born, with the phone and the computer when they came up, right? To a lot of folks, that is a skill set that you learn, but you can learn a lot of things. You learn how to drive, you learn how to walk. A lot of people, it's not something that on day one. And so I think being open-minded and sort of like having a mentality where you can adopt new technologies as they come out rather than ignoring or trying to pretend like they don't exist. I think having an open mind is a really important, specifically because any new technology that comes out, if you are an early adopter of that technology, can provide you with leading edge or early advantage compared to some of the more entrenched competitors. But I also think that from a process perspective, you want to make sure that perhaps you still continue doing things the old way, in parallel testing out some of the things using the new technologies. And so a very concrete example would be underwriting, where before you would still do all the all calculate all the ratios and get all the data, and still kind of do it in the way that you used to do. But now you can also ask additional questions using AI models, and maybe even in the future, like Mark was saying, train agents to continuously ingest new data and come up with new recommendations. You probably shouldn't switch your entire business model to only rely on this new technology, but finding a middle ground where you are benefiting from new technologies in addition to how you've always done things.
And Mark, what do you suggest?
It's a very interesting question, right? I've been accused by my employees of chasing shiny squirrels. And I realized that it's important to sort of divide up that activity within the organization. So you need to have some folks that are out there, chasing shiny squirrels and kind of looking and exploring the new technologies, because not all of them are going to be useful. In fact, most probably are not. And so, as you vet technologies into the organization, then you need to train the remainder of the organization or parts of the organization on leveraging those technologies. So I'll give you guys an example. About 2.5 years ago now, I went down this rabbit hole of improving our infrastructure for how we build and deploy predictive models. And, I tried not to waste the organization's time with experiments and failures, because they had other things to focus on at the time. But once I identified the tooling that I thought was going to make the organization better, I brought in a few more folks in the organization. We built a proof of concept. And we said, okay, let's validate if that proof of concept is going to meet our needs. And so we spent some time on that. And then we went broader and we said, okay, you know what? We like this proof of concept. Let's take one project and take it all the way through to production to see if, that actually validates the things that we learned in the proof of concept. And once we got that through, and obviously in this evolution, we had to learn and adjust things, right? My first idea wasn't quite right, but there was a version of it that was successful. Once we got there, we said, okay, now this is the new way. Now, hey, 20-person teams, you're going to learn this new technology. You're going to use it. We're going to write documentation. You're going to use it this way, right? And now that's the rule, right? That's the way we do things. And so I think that model really is what you want to do within organizations. Is you want to sort of start with some small group that's able to test out these new technologies and then create standard operating procedure, because companies are somewhat organic machines, right? And you can't you can't expect them to, for these things to magically happen. You have to guide the process, right? And so if we say, hey, we want people that are going to be prepared for this new tech, okay, we can hire people that are prepared for this new tech. We can train people, but ultimately you need to figure out, what do you actually want to do with it, right? Why is it useful? And then once you know that, you can teach people those aspects.
From a product management perspective, I think if any of that becomes client facing, you want to make sure you phase it out gradually. So, and test it on a small segment of customers. It feels like a very obvious, advice, but the amount of companies, both startups and large organizations, that get really excited early on, to Mark's points about some of the things, but not like what Mark is doing is smart, right? Not wasting companies' resources, building a proof of concept, trying it out internally, trying it out on a small scale, and then gradually deciding if that's something we're going to adopt or not. And for us, for example, a recent example that I can think of is we made certain adjustments to how we price the capital that we provide by including a lot more data that all of a sudden we have access to, which we haven't had before. And we've tested it on a small group of net new customers, to see how kind of like the, both from the underwriting efficiencies as well as conversion, meaning how many will actually accept the terms that we're offering. And what we found out is that while that change made a lot of sense in our heads, where yes, there was a lot more data, we should definitely make use of it. In reality, the basic components were just good enough to still allow us to underwrite with the exact same kind of quality and price it. I'm talking about pricing specifically without overcomplicating it. And so what we ended up doing is actually reverting it. But I'm glad that we didn't spend 3 to 6 months and apply that to all the customers that were coming in over that period of time. I'm glad that we actually did it on a small group of customers, and we actually condensed the testing period, meaning that we only gave ourselves a couple of months, to see if that will translate into any sort of negative outcomes, because there's certainly negative outcomes to using some of that innovation as well. And so kind of having that test that you can manage, quantify, and then decide if it's a successful test or not, and then release that into the world. Like I really think that approach is something that innovators should be thinking about.
Well, if you look at it from, I mean, one of the latest articles that Forrester published, I think it was early this week or late last week. He was talking about the evolution of how AI solutions are really keep failing because of this transformation on people accepting them, and how the MVPs are becoming now the norm, which is really funny because this is what I've been doing for the last year and a half. I changed the POC approach to an MVP approach, because if you don't are not doing something that is a product that is driven by the process that the user or the persona that's going to be affected by it, it's part of what they do. You're not going to be successful. Change management has and will continue to be a big piece of the success of projects or failures of projects. And this comes with the, tied to this question is, how do you prepare your team? You don't need to make everybody literate about what AI is and what everything is behind, but you got to make them understand how the AI assists them to become better, and in something that they are not capable, like Mark addressed early on being able to do it, by its own right now. So I would say, how do you prepare the team? For me, it's different because I keep preparing my team to be able to use the new technology. So it's a different challenge that I have, because it's who I prepare for what, right? It's understanding. If you understand who that user is, what that persona is, and what they're going to be using the tool for, I think it makes life a lot easier for you to, bring some additional tool that they feel that they're going to adapt and be able to help them do their work better. When you try to impose things, it's even to your clients. Oh, you had a brain idea. AI, I'm going to change the website and how I'm going to interact with the client. And then you have a client that's used to doing something, and all of a sudden it's not using, your website or your mobile app, the way you were expecting them to do. They get all confused about what you're doing. So in that part, but you're right. Testing is very important, but I think it's a question of putting things out there that you really get feedback from the person that's going to be using them.
But then I want to not challenge you, but this is from my experience. So I want to know how you would deal with the situation. And Mark, I'll give you 1 minute as well on this. And I know we need to wrap up in 7 minutes. So, well, then the question is, in theory, what you said is perfect. I think it sounds like a good plan when you roll it out. But I hear from customers and partners that I work with, they tell me if my team uses this thing and it doesn't do the AI miracles, it doesn't give me what I'm looking for, they will never touch it again. How do you work with such particular customers? Because these could be very old, let's say traditional industries, manufacturing or construction. How do you work around these issues in your day to day?
Yeah, I think those industries that you mentioned are so underserved from the technology perspective, where I feel like even the slightest improvement in user experience and enabling them to benefit from even a small percentage of technology that you and I, or startups versus incumbents, or Silicon Valley versus the rest of the world take for granted, will allow them to compete and improve, and just improve their efficiency in so many more ways. Now, the amount of operators and just business people that I talk to that don't have a CRM, don't have a way to even find information in terms of leads, customers, whatever, don't, and they're making 10-20 million dollars a year in revenue. I feel like the world really focuses on, well, you have to have all these things, otherwise you won't be able to compete. And yet we forget that there are so many industries and so many different folks out there that are already quite successful, and they've never even used these tools even today. And so obviously there's a lot of opportunity, to bring those tools to people. But, I think from the technology adoption perspective, it depends on the person. It depends on, how you want people to buy into that technology. And, are you doing it because it comes from you and they have to, or are you putting it in front of them as a way to empower them and let them to make the decision on whether or not that's the right decision for them? And at least for our organization, we never force any of that innovation. There are certain things internally when it comes to underwriting and risk that we just chose to do, whether that's from a process perspective or working with certain vendors that have that technology already, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and we just mandate the use of that. But that never really changes how our own team does it or feels about it. It just allows us to do things that we need to do more efficiently. But from a perspective of, you have to use these certain tools, or I have to kind of make an impression that it allows you to, I mean, technology scares a lot of people too, right? Because
Yeah.
the first thing that people think about when it comes out is, am I going to lose my job? And we're very sympathetic to that. What we're trying to
But
do
then,
internally is
Mhm.
remove the fear that this will ever result in loss of job or loss of responsibility. And as long as you communicate that, I think they will find it themselves much more motivated to use it. Sorry.
I see. It's an interesting thought there that it comes down to fear.
I want to address this fear point. It's actually very, very interesting. So I've always viewed technology as a means to remove jobs, because the reality is there's always more things to do, right? I am always, in running my business, prioritizing. What do we do next? Right? Because the list of things to try and do is infinite, right? But your resources are not. So, you know, my view is, I will work really, really hard to automate away my job, right? If I can, right? And then take the next step, right? Keep doing it. So I think that's one sort of point to address. I think the next one to really, really think about is uh, these are tools, right? In any way, these are tools, and it's about having the right tool for the job, right? If I'm there to screw in a screw and you bring me a bigger hammer, let me tell you, that's going to make a mess. I watched my son try to do that. That makes a really big mess, right? So it's about having the right tool for the job. And so if the particular task you're trying to do can leverage some of this advanced technology, great, let's figure that out. But maybe it doesn't work. Maybe you don't need that. Right? So you always kind of need to learn about the capabilities. You need to understand what tools exist, right? And whether you want to use them. Maybe it's the right tool, but it's too expensive, right? It could very well be that buying, or building, let's say you're building a system. It's going to cost you a couple of $1 million to build and implement this system. What is it going to do? It's going to replace $100,000 employee. It's going to take you a lot of time to get that ROI, right? So you have to keep that in mind, right? And those are the choices that you always have to make as you're running a business. So that's kind of how I
Thanks.
think about it.
Mario
Yeah,
needs a minute. Mario, go on.
I think Mark that and that's the challenge is following you up because you and I have talked enough that we have a lot of the similar common sense. But what I've been approaching the conversation, and you know that because we talked many times, is really if the value of what you're gonna do with the technology is not there. I keep on telling everybody AI moves so fast and the technology is moving so fast, and if your need for this technology solution does not give you an ROI that's within 9 months, I mean 12 months at maximum, then you should move on and find something else to do. And I'm very happy to tell the clients that feedback because the reality is that once again, do you need a screwdriver or do you need the hammer? And so with that, look, I would say, what's the end game of the conversation? The end game of the conversation is if you need it, but it's worth it, then do it. But if you need it and you don't get the return, let's keep doing it and go back to the old saying: if you ain't broke, don't fix it.
Thank you, Mario. So with that, gentlemen, I'm going to wrap things up. This brings us to the end of today's webcast. Huge thank you to Mark, Vadim, and Mario for sharing their insights and thoughts. We hope you found the discussion valuable and it sparked some new ideas for your own organizations, and we hope to see you on the next episode.